how do you pivot from like a traditional M&A data room into ESG? Was it just like a light bulb one moment and you're just like, we probably should be doing this? Or did someone come to you guys? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, it's quite iterative, and it's also not just solely me as well. I'm one of the co-founders at Ansarada, and so Sam, one of my co-founders, was very instrumental in beginning to look into this space. But it's like there's a couple of things, right, when it comes together. Our business, like all businesses, you have a place that you start. It was the original idea, the original solution, a product, the original customer set, the original product market fit, and that's where you played. And if you never got to product market fit, well, then your business died and no one ever heard of you. So you, on the basis that our business has been around for 15 years now, clearly we got product market fit with the core solution, which was the deal room, the virtual data room, as other people call them. Now, we've always, as a business, been looking to how do we leverage our heritage for the future of our business, because it's not a insight these days to know that if you don't disrupt yourself, you'll be disrupted. You can't just there's no business that can continue to do the same thing for extended periods of time without shifting or changing, and then eventually either someone else comes and does it better, faster, cheaper, or there's a more macro shift where your services or solutions aren't required anymore, or ultimate competition, like you might have barriers to entry drop down and then you end up in a commoditized market. Any of those things can happen to anyone, right? And it's not big, small, and medium. It can happen to, and there's MBAs and case studies that abound on examples of that. So where we, like all good businesses, are always been on the lookout, but also you've got to kind of go, what makes sense? Where is the, I guess investors, or particularly in VC land, would call it an adjacency. I call it what makes sense, what naturally fits in our world, where our previous business, or our current, and now, I guess when I say previous, I mean our heritage, makes sense. Because it's the question often is, why you? Why, in this instance, why Ansarada?
Ansarada, yeah.
And if you can't answer that question particularly well, then it's potentially not a very good adjacency. So why is ESG relevant to Ansarada? Well, we've got 15 years of heritage in the capital market space, helping people with transactions, M&A deals, buying and selling assets, raising capital, IPOing, all this stuff, that deals land, as I call it. And ESG is obviously a massive emerging trend. And one of the problems I find with ESG is that because it's a trend, I mean, it's got the Gartner hype cycle for ESG is probably gone past peak hype, and now we're getting into the reality of it. It's not like ChatGPT, which is just at peak.
That's
hype.
one of my rules. Can't talk about ChatGPT, right? Unless you want to put like on LinkedIn about, hey, this is how it can improve your sales cycle, like every other guru does.
No, I'm gonna make up a statistic. 87% of all content on LinkedIn now is done by generative AI. So any authenticity that was left on LinkedIn has been completely obliterated. Like, don't get me started about people that post pictures of their food on LinkedIn. It's like ChatGPT has just taken it to a whole nother level of pointless. And this is from someone who's not been on Facebook for...
Oh, I've seen you on MySpace, Stu. Come on.
I haven't been on Facebook for, I'm going to guess, around about 15 years. 15 years ago, I was like, this is not going in the right direction. But anyway, I've digressed. So why ESG for Ansarada? Because one of the things that we have found when looking at ESG is that it's most relevant, and probably the imperative is higher, so the urgency and the motivation to get across ESG is actually at its peak in a transactional context.
Yeah.
Why is pretty straightforward, because if I'm going to sell my business and I've got potential buyers, increasingly those buyers will be saying to me, okay, cool, well, show me your financial information, and show me your all your customer contracts, and like all the usual diligence stuff. And then they also say, show me what you guys are doing on ESG, and do you understand the impact that you're making on the business? Because increasingly buyers, and if you think about one segment of buyers, which is private equity. They buy a lot of stuff. Increasingly, most funds now are saying, well, we don't want to buy or invest in a business that's adopting an ESG liability.
Okay.
So, I mean, to give a dramatic and silly example, like no one's going to want to buy a business into their portfolio and then they find out later that, I don't know, the factory that's a part of the portfolio is spewing lead into the river, right? Like no one wants that on their hands for multiple reasons. It's a financial and legal risk, but also increasingly as humans, people just don't want to see that stuff happening at all, let alone it being part of your portfolio of risk. So that's the first why Ansarada, because we've been in deals for 15 years. We're very good at governing information. Obviously, security is paramount, maintaining and managing your data, controlling who sees it, getting it back, all that sort of information governance is important. But we've also got very good at making complex processes as simple as possible with technology. And ESG is complex. Like, there's ESG, and then there's, well, which framework are you going to work on? And
I was going to say, are there like different frameworks to it? Or
yeah,
so you can do like a DISC profile, and there's like a billion different types of DISC profile. Is it the same sort of concept where everyone's kind of, this is the best one, or this is the best framework? Or...
and that's a part of the Wild West aspect of ESG at the moment, where there's emerging and therefore probably competing frameworks. There's 3 or 4 which are broadly being accepted as probably the good quality and most credible, and there's one that we believe and most people, it seems to be emerging as the clear framework, which is the GRI framework. So we've built our solutions on the basis of the GRI framework, and it takes into account, I can't actually remember off the top of my head, but you're talking 80, 90, 100 different topics that you need to consider potentially, which are relevant to your business if you go to assess yourself on ESG capability. Take climate change as just one of them. I mean, it's a high profile one, but the E is environment, but S is social and G is governance. And actually, so 2/3 of it actually a lot less to do with environment and a lot more to do with social equity and people and society.
So more controllable metrics as well, right? For you as a new company.
And not like, if let's just say there's 100 topics in ESG you need to have a think about, actually for any one business, only 30 or 20 or 40 or whatever might be relevant, right? But that's complicated. How do you know? How do you know where to start? How do you even know what the menu of topics and issues are? And that's one of the things that we've been very focused on, is make it easy. You don't need to know all of that stuff. Just go on the journey, help us understand your business, and the technology will say, well, you need to worry about these things. And then how much do you care about those things? Like, take modern slavery as an issue. Is like, if I'm in a retail business, I mean, I spent years in my first career as a lawyer. I spent some time as a lawyer for the Tesco business, which was, a fantastic opportunity for me career-wise. Modern slavery is a massive issue for any retailing business, because you've got such sophisticated and deep supply chains, and you need to know what's happening in those supply chains. Now, a subset of or a sister issue to modern slavery is child labor. Again, you can't have child labor in your supply chain, but how do you actually know whether you do or you don't? This is where it gets very deep and complex very quickly, and the ability to allow organizations to quickly and simply assess their ESG status, almost like a baseline. This is where I'm at. I'm good on this. I've got some growth opportunity here. I really need to focus on that, because from there you then develop a strategy, develop a plan, and off you go on your journey. And but if you've got an entry point, to come back to your actual question of how did we start to think about it after being in the deal space, and we're not leaving the deal space. The deal space is still a very important and always will be an important aspect to our business. The adjacency is that we're seeing it being most productively focused on, as in ESG, at the transaction point, which makes sense. And to put a full stop behind that, the data is already showing why that's good, because companies are getting greater valuations if they can show where they're up to and what they're doing on their ESG journey. Because it's not about going, do your assessment and get a 10 out of 10 and then you're good to go. You're somewhere between 0 and 10 out of 10, but then what are you doing to address them? Because no one no one expects anyone to be a 10 out of 10 instantly. But if you're a 7 or if you're a 3, here's my plan and strategy to get to as close to 10 as possible over the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, depending on the size of your issues in your businesses, right? And better valuations. So if you're a founder selling, it's about size of check. And then, so if you're like, I can get a bigger check if I can express my ESG status and capabilities and plans, you would, there's an imperative to do so. That size of check is your motivator. But also increasingly, the competitive landscape for people investing or buying you is dwindling if you don't express ESG capability, because some funds, for example, won't even bid. They'll have mandates saying, we won't even bid or be involved in any potential transaction unless we have ESG diligence materials. So again, less potential buyers. That's, basic Smithsonian economics, right? Supply and demand. You're going to probably not get the best outcome from your transaction. So that's the Venn diagram. And then the last bit, this may be setting the record for the longest answer yet on your podcast.
Keep going.
The last piece has got nothing to do with, I've talked about practical common sense and business sense and adjacencies and Venn diagrams. This last bit is less to do with head and more to do with heart. We as a business and our whole leadership team and our whole business is continually pivoting our purpose towards greater impact and helping the world's businesses have at least a net zero or neutral impact.
Yeah.
But increasingly, the future is actually sustainable or positive impact, so that the impact of a business from its business operations actually is regenerative on the ecosystems that it operates in. It's environmental ecosystems, it's people, communities, stakeholder ecosystems, and governance ecosystems. I imagine every business in the world is putting more back into the ecosystems that it affects. And I'll make sure it's really clear. When I say ecosystems, naturally everyone thinks of Sir David Attenborough and
polar bears stuff,
climate and environment, but ecosystems actually as a word doesn't necessarily relate to that. There's your community and your ecosystems of people, so your staff and your staff's family and the communities they operate in, but the communities, if you have shops on the high street, you've got a physical ecosystem. So it's not just climate at all. If you are giving back more to those ecosystems than you're taking out, and then you multiply that across the world's small to medium-sized enterprises, which comprise 90% of the world's businesses and employ 50% of the workforce, you've just moved the needle, right? I'm really good at home with my recycling and my food scraps, and I do all that stuff. And a lot of people are increasingly doing more of that stuff. But sometimes it feels like, am I actually making a difference by doing this? But what if 90% of the world's businesses were putting back into ecosystems more than they were taking out? Because at the moment, today, they're pretty much all taking out more than they put in, because it's the race to at least neutrality. But if we can go from neutrality to positive impact, and that purpose, and maybe the listeners have even noticed the speed of my voice is picked up, because it's like there's genuine passion in that. That is heart. That's fire and and passion. And that's also one of the other motivators for us to go into it. So it's good for business, it's smart business, it's a big addressable market. They're all the economic stuff. And also, we actually think we can make our business grow at the same time as actually having positive impact. And we call that good growth. You don't have to, you can have both. And that's what we're achieving.
I think that's the kicker, right? Is that it's okay for it to be financially incentivized, right? Because like people are thinking like ESG, like, oh, it's all good graces and stuff. But I think it's okay for that to have a financial impact of good things for the business as well, right? As you were saying. So,
well,
like,
I'd go one step further, Rob. I'd go one step further. I'd say it's actually almost necessary.
Yeah.
Because, because otherwise, I mean, you've got on one extreme, you've got, charitable or philanthropic enterprise, the third sector, as sometimes it's referred to. There's no profit driver. And one of the key issues with that sector is its efficiency. So, for every dollar, if I donate $1 to pick your favorite charity, how much of that dollar actually goes to the cause?
They get like 10 cents or whatever, right?
Yeah. And look, some are better than others, and, efficiencies will come and go. But the problem is, one of the good things about a profit driver is that you've got to make a profit. And
Yeah.
the good thing about that is that then you will find efficiency. That is, capitalism's gone through, many guises, and it's certainly gone through a lot of legitimate criticism over the last few decades about how healthy it is. One of the things I think that is healthy about capitalism, at least, is that if you have to drive towards profit and actually have a business that makes money, so it gets more than it spends, you will naturally find the most efficient way to do whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
And those are that sort of capital drive will drive efficiency, and it drives innovation. And those things are good. Now, if you can do that, and what you're doing is making a positive impact on planet and people, that's the ultimate win. That's the double win, right? That's the superposition of two waves, creating a really good big wave.
Yeah, no, 100% right. I think it's about kind of bringing those two things together. All right. And I think and it's even swaying the people on the fence, right? Because like if you can get them into the world of ESG and thinking about it, that, okay, and I'm sure you guys over time will be able to build metrics, right? So if, hey, I run I don't know, manufacturing company, I'm looking to sell it. We've got a score of 4 in an ESG concept. And you guys can be like, hey, if you had a score of 7, you'd be actually looking at like 6 or 7 times your multiple compared to the 3 you're looking at, right? So you can try and build those report metrics as well, right?
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And I think also one of the other things is there's kind of these concepts of first wave, second wave, and third wave, which of adoption, which in ESG land is, first wave is people, going, oh, this is BS. This is just, CSR rebranded. I'm negative on it. I'm actually, in fact, in NPS parlance, you're a detractor. You think it doesn't apply to me. It's not going to add any value. It's a waste of time. That's the sort of first, most negative mindset, right? And then there's the next mindset, which is wave 2, where you're, I guess, at least a bit more curious, a bit more understanding, and perhaps going, and then there'll be one group that goes, we're going to do the ESG thing just because we're nice people and we think it's the right thing to do. And it may not actually be the most economical, business smart thing to do. We're going to do it because we're passionate. Now, those people exist. Patagonia is the Patagonian business is a great example of that. But they're too few and far between, and we can't rely on just people being nice, right? Because it's just not enough of that. Because at the end of the day, running a business is hard, and I, as a business owner, you make decisions and you go, well, I would like to be able to do that because it feels like the right thing to do, but geez, I don't think we can afford it. And am I then going to blow up my whole business and we employ a couple of hundred people and those sorts of stuff, being dramatic. But then you move into, I'm doing it because I have to, and that's a regulatory mindset. So if I don't do it, I get a fine or whatever. Where we kind of want everyone to get to, when I say we, I mean we as like the whole world, not we just Ansarada,
right? Yeah,
it's good business. So this links back to your concept of, it's okay if it's got a profit driver. Where a lot of businesses are getting to quickly, and I think all businesses will get to, is they realize that it's actually good business because of the following, right? Because increasing, I think there was a Bain report quite recently that said products and services that have a genuine sustainability aspect to the product or service are growing at 5.6 times products and services that are not. So customers are looking for stuff, services and products that, to use the term generically, that are green, but it's not just climate green, but that are good, that are giving back. So there's a customer pull, which is convincing. Investors we've talked about, so people won't invest in you, increasingly won't invest in you, or banks might not increasingly credit you. I actually only posted on LinkedIn yesterday, and I don't know the details, so to make it as my disclaimer, but there were some French non-government organizations that have sued BNP Paribas for investing in fossil fuel projects. Okay, so you're like, okay, so increasingly investors and credit might dry up if you're not ESG aligned. People, a business is just a clump of people with a common purpose, and increasingly as the generations move through, millennials now are running businesses in the world. Whatever generations before that, I think it's Z.
X or Z, yeah, one of them.
No, I'm X.
You're X.
millennial,
I'm,
Gen
it's really confusing.
Y?
I'm a millennial, but I was born in 87. Isn't it when you become like a grown up? That's when it's defined as your generation, I think.
Is it when you can grow a beard?
I'm still waiting. So maybe I'm like, so, but yeah, so I'm a millennial.
I don't know.
So
So, but
whatever.
as the generations are coming through, they're increasingly more driven by motivations that have a lot less to do with money and a lot more to do with, well, what is the purpose? What is the motivation to be here? And is it linked to purpose? And are we having positive impact? So it gets harder to attract talent because people are like, oh, you're one of those dirty businesses. I don't want to work for you.
Sure.
So you've got customers deserting you, credit and investors and buyers deserting you, talent deserting you. I actually think the next phase, and I've not seen any evidence of this yet, but I think insurability will desert you. What if you couldn't get insurance anymore for your business because of your ESG lack of credentials? So all of that stuff means it's actually bad business to not be good at this. Now, the beautiful thing is that everyone being good at this, as we said earlier, moves the needle massively. And I keep coming back to the stat, 90% of the world's businesses are small to medium-sized enterprises, employing 50% of the world's workforce. That is a cohort that can move the needle and move the needle very quickly. And some people will disagree with the following, but I have greater faith in for-profit businesses moving the needle and driving innovation and change than I do have in the world governments cooperating and collaborating. I mean,
Sure.
how many, what COP are we up to? COP 29, which is, I think, in an oil field country, which I'm not sure is some sort of like giant sarcastic joke by the United Nations or just
a slap in the face, man.
Bit of a misjudgment. But we'll have COP 30, 31, 32, 33, and, you know, we'll go to COP 700, really, if the planet lasts that long. And they'll still just be talking about crap.
Yeah, on their private jets, right? So.
Meanwhile, the innovation that SMEs can drive and the impact that can be created, businesses like Ansarada and lots of other businesses like ours, we're doing the work. That's what we're passionate about. And that's how we got into it, mate.
I think also, like, people think that like adoption speeds up over time as well, right? So it may take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get to 40, 50% doing this. But when you get over that kind of hump, then the rest adopt, right? Because it becomes the lingua franca of doing business, right? And then the big organizations listen because you have, and again, it happens with, like, if we use the M&A world, right? This senior MD banker goes from this bank to this bank, they take those processes with them, right? And so you see that from, like, even in like big startup or big unicorn startups, they're putting people out of like big four and big institutional companies, and they'll go into these companies, then they'll go back in, and then they'll change the mindsets of how those companies run. So you kind of get this, people move all the time, right? So you get this amalgamation of ideas. So
that's right. But I think it's important, though, to recognize that, because, you know, I've specifically been referring to the world's small to medium-sized enterprises. You've got big business, right? And big business, big impact, big employer, but they're a much lower percentage overall of the world's total cohort of businesses. But obviously, they do a lot bigger part of the pie in terms of, you know, the revenues that are driven from their businesses. The thing is, though, most big businesses, I mean, they've all got the resources, they've all got sustainability teams, and they've all got ESG teams, and they've all got a head of or a director of this and that, you know, and they've actually, a lot of them have been, you know, on this journey already for a number of years, and they don't need the help that Ansarada can offer,
sure,
whereas the world's SMEs do. And, you know, I mean, Shell is a very interesting example. Now, I'm not deeply involved in that business. I don't purport to understand it very well, and they obviously probably legitimately get a lot of criticism about a lot of things. You know, for example, you know, they probably dug up a fair bit of the oil and coal and what have you that's been burnt over the last 100 years. But I guess I'll phrase it more as a question or an idea as opposed to committing to a position. But I would have thought a business like Shell, which is, you know, essentially deeply rooted in its DNA, is engineering and innovation. That's really, they're an engineering company, right?
Yeah.
And they've got clearly a lot of money. I mean,
Lots of cash, especially
yeah,
over the last year.
yeah. I mean, we all saw the headlines over the last.
For sure.
BP were the same, like record profits, all this kind of stuff, and obviously the Russian invasion of the Ukraine has turned out to be a bit of a windfall for the energy companies for all the various reasons that we all broadly understand. But I would have thought a company like Shell, just to pick them out, not to pick on them, just to pick them out as an example, are very, very well positioned to actually innovate in renewable energy, renewable sources, greener energies, that kind of stuff. And in fact, no doubt, I actually, are already doing that, have been doing it for quite a long while, and are pivoting ultimately their business away from fossil fuels. So, I think also you should be like really careful to quickly go, oh, you're an oil company, you equal bad. Okay, you're an oil company and we need to get away from that, and actually damage is massively being done. Let's not forget that concept and that heritage of your business. But actually, they're probably very well positioned to actually have significant impact into the future. But they don't need help, right? They've got billions of dollars and thousands of people and super smart, and they've got access to great talent and all that kind of stuff. So that's why, just for the listener here, to help them understand why I keep going on about the SMEs. The SMEs don't have those resources. They don't have that time. ESG is a very hard issue for them to even start with. And that's why we've focused on them as a cohort that can have the biggest impact, but also need the most assistance as well.